Today we're going to study about jazz. Not only jazz, but if you look on the title page of Part 8 on page 467, you'll see we'll be studying about ragtime, blues, New Orleans style, swing, bebop, and then jazz style since the 1950s. We're also going to have our student report on Scott Joplin. On pages 467 through 493, you can read about jazz music, but basically between 1900 and 1950. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Jazz originated in the streets, bars, brothels, and dance halls of New Orleans. It started out as dance music, and later it evolved into music that was just for listening. And so now you can just go to a concert and hear jazz music, but you're not expected to get up and dance to it. But when it was originally invented, it was started out as dance music. It used a lot of call and response, which was rooted in the African American church services in which the congregation responds to the call of the preachers. Jazz bands started out using just the trumpet, trombone, tuba, clarinet, and drums. Some of the characteristics of jazz are as follows. Jazz combos typically have 3 to 8 players. The rhythm section includes a piano, a plucked string bass, percussion, and sometimes guitar. These instruments have a percussive sound because of either the piano has the hammer hitting the string, the plucked string bass versus a bowed string bass will have more the boom, 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 boom. And the guitar is going to be more doing chords versus melody. And so, for example, the guitar might do something like this. That is an accompaniment pattern, and it's providing rhythm for what would be the melody. And one of the early jazz songs was When the Saints Go Marching In. So this would be the guitar playing accompaniment or rhythm with the melody. Oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, how I want to be in that number, when the saints go marching in. And so they would add that guitar to add to the rhythm section. The main solo instruments in jazz groups early on were the trumpet, saxophone, piano, clarinet, and trombone. And they will take turns playing these solos. So the whole group will play together, and they'll be using the 12-bar blues pattern typically, or they could be using a different jazz pattern where they have a designated chord progression. And then after the whole group plays, the rest of the group will play in the background the same chord progression, and the trumpet, saxophone, piano, clarinet, or trombone will have a solo above the rest of the group. And then the whole group will play again, and then the soloist will play. And typically, after the soloist plays, the audience will applaud the soloist because they have been improvising and playing a melody that they are making up over this background accompaniment. The brass instruments use a variety of mutes to change their tone color. And so on the next slide, I'll show you some different mutes that brass players will use. And the performers also tend to bend the notes. La 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 da, versus da 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 da. That was bending the notes. But then you have these glissandos, so whoop, and it would just gliss up or down. And so those would be added in instead of just going da 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 da. And they also exaggerated their vibrato. And so the performers would have on their instruments, instead of going da, then it goes wah, it would be a big, big vibrato going on and just kind of exaggerate it. And this just helped make the music more jazz-like sounding. Here is a picture of some examples of mutes that they would put into a trumpet. And each different mute will make the trumpet sound a different way. And they can even actually just use a toilet plunger and put it at the bell, at the end of the bell, and just have it so that it's leaning up against the trumpet bell and then parallel to the floor, so it gives it a wah, 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 wah sound. But these other brass mutes mute it, and you'll probably hear them in some of the videos that we'll be watching later on as we listen to some jazz pieces. Improvisation is a big part of jazz. Jazz improvisation is usually a theme and variations. There'll be a 32-bar theme that is written out, and the soloist improvises on that theme by adding embellishments or by changing pitches and the rhythms. And so the rest of the ensemble will play softly behind them, and they will be providing, as it says here, the underlying harmonic pattern played by the rhythm section, which is your piano, guitar, string, bass, and drums, does not change, and the soloist just improvises above this harmonic pattern. Jazz rhythms are usually in a swing pattern of long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short verses. Bum, 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 bum. It's going to go la, da, 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 da. That's a characteristic of the jazz sound. We will now have our student report on Scott Joplin, who was born in 1868 and died in 1917. Some Joplin tidbits, just in case our student who did the report on Scott Joplin didn't cover these things. Here's some things that I thought were interesting about Scott Joplin. He is called the King of Ragtime, basically because he helped to develop ragtime music, and he helped make it popular, and most of the music he wrote was ragtime, and two of the pieces that he wrote became just national phenomenons. He started out working with his father building the railroad. He and his dad worked together for the railroad, but when he turned 20, he decided he'd had enough working on the railroad and he wanted to become a traveling musician entertainer, and so he pursued that career. When he was 24, he had the opportunity to perform ragtime music for people who were attending the World's Fair, and this propelled him to fame. Now, he was not able to play in any of the bigger venues because he was African American, but he went to all of the little restaurants and all of the little eatery places and entertainment places that were surrounding the World's Fair, and he was just an instantaneous hit. Everyone loved his music, and it propelled him to fame. His two songs, The Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer, sold over 1 million copies, which was more than any other instrumental piece had ever sold up until that time. Unfortunately, those were his only two really big hits. He kept trying over and over and over to come up with another really famous song, and he wrote some other nice pieces, but they did not have the popularity and bring in the financial stability that the other two pieces had brought for him. And he died at the age of 49 from a physical and mental breakdown. He just was not able to break that barrier again of having his music to be bestsellers like these two, The Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer, had been. Now let's listen to the two pieces that were so famous by Scott Joplin. First will be The Maple Leaf Rag. Ragtime was developed by African American pianists who traveled in the Midwest and the South, playing in saloons and dance halls, and it usually was in duple meter and is highly syncopated, has this ragged rhythm, da-da, 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 da-da. And Scott Joplin was one of these people who toured and traveled in the Midwest, performing this ragtime music and propelling it to popularity. If you look on page 474, you will see the listening guide for The Maple Leaf Rag. And go to the website and click on the YouTube link and listen to this recording. The second piece that was so popular that Scott Joplin wrote is The Entertainer. And the recording that we're going to listen to today for this is actually performed by Scott Joplin. That's one of the nice things about these composers that were composing during the more modern times. We can actually hear them perform their own pieces. And so this is what this recording is Scott Joplin playing the entertainer. On page 474 and 475, you'll begin reading about the blues. And on the top of page 475, you'll see, you'll read information about W.C. Handy's Memphis Blues. There's also the St. Louis Blues, but since we are located in Memphis, I decided to go ahead and feature the Memphis Blues by W.C. Handy. This map shows you how the blues and jazz moved north up the Mississippi River. It all started in New Orleans, down in Louisiana, and then it moved up the river to Memphis, Tennessee, then up to St. Louis, Missouri, and all the way to Chicago, Illinois. The reason that it went up the river is that so many of the musicians would just catch a boat up the river, and they would realize, you know, this area has been saturated. There's just so many jazz musicians and so many blues musicians in this area. Let's take it upriver. And so they would take it from New Orleans up to Memphis, and they would get in this area and perform. And then before long, that area would be saturated with jazz performers and blues performers. And so they would catch the boat up the Mississippi River on to St. Louis, then on to Chicago, so that the music gradually crept northward in the United States as musicians and composers and performers would catch those river boats and go north. On page 475, you'll read about the 12-bar blues, which are a very, very common set of chord progressions that were used in blues music. So what they would have is they would have 4 bars of 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they'd have 2 bars of subdominant, 1, 2, and then 2 bars of tonic, 1, 2. Then they have 2 bars of dominant, 2, and then back to tonic, 1, 2. So you'll hear this in Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. So here's just an example of me kind of leading you through that, and then you'll listen to him sing it, and you can hear that 12-bar blues pattern go by. So you've got the 1, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Then you go to the subdominant, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, back to tonic, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Then you go to the 2 bars of dominant, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, and then you go back to the 2 bars of tonic, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. That is your Johnny Be Good 12-bar blues. Now, listen to Johnny Be Good sung by Chuck Berry on the YouTube link. The empress of the blues was Bessie Smith. She was born in 1894 and died in 1937. And if you look on page 475 and 476, you'll read about her song, Lost Your Head Blues. It is a 12-bar blues. It's set in that same pattern of 12-bar blues that Johnny Be Good was set to. And it uses all these syncopated rhythms, da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, da-dun, da-da-da-da-dun. It's got these dun, da-dun, da-dun, syncopated rhythms going on. You'll hear lots of slides and quivers in her voice that she will add in there to add emotion. And the blues deal with pain of betrayal, desertion, and unrequited love. And the first time it is sung, it is repeated, and then the third line is different. So you'll hear in this song, I'm going to leave my baby, ain't gonna say goodbye. And then she's gonna say that same thing again. I'm going to leave my baby, ain't gonna say goodbye. And then she'll go on to the B section. But I'll write you and tell you the reason why. And so this has this same little pattern of A, A, B, A, A, B, which is repeated over and over throughout this song. Now look on page 479 and you'll begin reading about the New Orleans style of jazz and blues. And on page 480 and 481, you can read about King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, and they sing the Dippermouth Blues. So go ahead and listen to this piece. And then after that, I would like you to listen to When the Saints Go Marching In, performed by Louis Armstrong, you can read about him on page 481. Notice that the performer now has frequently become more important than the composer. We know who is singing or playing, but we don't really know who composed it. And that is a trend that will continue through today. Now, Louis Armstrong was born in 1901 and he died in 1971. Now, I couldn't pass up his #1 hit of 1964 from Hello Dolly, the musical. Let's listen to this one. On page 482, you will see the listening guide to Louis Armstrong's Hotter Than That. It was very popular, and it uses what is called scat singing. That's the vocalization of the melodic line with nonsense syllables, like shoo bop 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 doo bop bop boo da bop bop doo bop bop. They don't mean anything. It's just kind of using your voice as an instrument. You will see that it starts out with your introduction. It's 8 bars. Then there's a chorus. And Louis Armstrong both sang and played the trumpet. So you hear this trumpet solo accompanied by piano and guitar. And then you have the clarinet solo for the chorus 2 with piano and guitar. Then in chorus 3, you hear the vocal solo and the scat singing by Louis Armstrong with guitar accompaniment. There's an interlude with voice imitated by guitar, which leads into the muted trombone solo, piano, guitar, accompanying along, and then there's a tag of 4 bars. So just a really fun song to listen to. On page 482 and 483, you'll read about swing music. Swing music was played by the big bands from 1920s through 1945. It was mostly a release from war worries. You had all these world wars going on, and all of the men were going off to fight in the battles, and everyone was just worried about their loved ones, their sons, their husbands, their boyfriends. And so everyone would get together with these swing bands and have happy, joyful music that everyone would dance to and forget about the war for a little while. The big bands had 14 or 15 players, and all of their music was intended for dancing. It was all meant to get people up out of their seats, forget about their worries, and dance the night away. The saxophone rose in popularity during this time. It was a fairly new instrument, and these swing bands really utilized the saxophone a lot. And everyone just really loved the saxophone sound. It was kind of this new jazzy, swingy sound, and they just loved it. So listen to Glenn Miller's In the Mood, and you will see some of these people that get up and dance to the music. As time progressed, jazz became a form and style of music that you listened to more than you would dance to. And B.B. King, who's a good old Memphis boy, was one of those performers of jazz music that you often were not necessarily expected to get up and dance, but you were just supposed to have an evening that you would just sit and listen to music and relax. And this is a recording of B.B. King performing live in Paris. Jazz is one of the few truly American styles of music that we invented, and now all over the world people play jazz. And it had its roots in the United States.